St. Augustine reviews this in the Confessions, right? And is asked, what is time? He's like, everyone knows until they're actually asked what it is, basically, right? It's like, kind of know what it is. It's like, we're going to meet today at this time and, we'll be there and et cetera, right? But to me, that's something that's a kind of measure or common understanding of a relationship between individuals, societies, institutions about many times a place and events that have to happen at a particular time, right? And also the linear understanding of time where we live in a world of kind of befores and afters, right? Like, for the rest of our existence, probably everyone will remember the time before and after the pandemic, right? Where your perception of the world basically is altered by being able to properly place that kind of before and after, right? And there are people who live in the before and after 9/11 world, right? There's, for us as individuals, there's the before and after big events, like the before and after you graduate from high school, the before and after college, the before and after you get married, the before and after a child, et cetera, all these kinds of things, right? Formative events. So to me, temporality then becomes the way in which, as a subject, we're experiencing a variety of different individual or subjects or institutions' relationships to something like time, right? That then assembles a kind of relationship that to me is a common understanding of what I would consider to be temporality, where those kinds of befores and afters are assembled in a way that create a common understanding of the world. Now, what happens is, and what I'm exploring in this book is this notion of a fractured notion of temporality, where the before and after of the diasporic Black subject is fractured because of its relationship to the Middle Passage and an inability to properly access the kind of linear relationship of genealogy, these are things that Orlando Patterson deals with in his important book on these kinds of questions, right? Slavery and social death, where, this notion of natal alienation, all these kinds of things basically create a type of fractured temporal existence that doesn't allow what we understand as the common human relationship, subjective relationship to the before and after, even of who your family members happen to be or who your family members happen to be in the future, and a relationship to a common and unstable present. Now, that's a relationship. What I described first is in some ways kind of obvious because it's a relationship in the past that we can all think about. The way the Middle Passage and diasporic Black people have, me in as exemplar of that, don't have the possibility of tracing ourselves. And this is outside the question of this DNA stuff that's happened recently. But to have a kind of family relationship that's traced easily back through a family tree to some place in typically West Sub-Saharan Africa prior to the Middle Passage or kidnapping and being brought through the Middle Passage. But there's also a futuristic relationship, because the argument that I make in the book is that the notion of the primacy of death, right, the kind of notion that death can arrive out of sequence. And I'm thinking most particularly about the wages of state-based violence, mostly as police violence, where the notion that children are constantly always at risk, right, that and we've seen this over and over again, right, that, families who have to deal with children being killed out of sequence, right? So then the sequentiality of the relationship between the children bearing their parents is fractured in that way, right? You can make the same argument for people who die as a result of military service, all kinds of reasons why, parents are not meant to bury their children is kind of the kind of common way we understand that, right? When that relationship is altered, and some of this is Heideggerian, right? The kind of being towards death, when death is pulled directly into the present, it creates a fractured relationship with the temporality and also these questions of before and after that are the common understanding of what we consider to be time or the linear progression of time. The same thing would go if you're thinking about the death row inmate, or someone who knows the date, place, and methodology of their death is probably going to exist in a fractured kind of temporal relationship. Also, my argument is that subjects who don't have predictable relationships to something like the progression of birth, life, and death, also in a kind of fractured relationship with temporality. And that's what I think is particular about what I'm exploring in the book. And then the question of, to your point, right, the notion of homo liminalis means just that, right? And I'm thinking liminality in the sense that it represents itself in the limit function in calculus, which is an instantaneous snapshot of time, right? And some of this comes from my relationship with kind of Ralph Ellison's work in Invisible Man, where he talks about these kinds of nodes where time kind of stops and you leap forward or backward with nothing in between that, right? So it's kind of these forward leaps that happen that have nothing to do with what we just discussed about the common relationship of before or after, and the notion of how the future kind of flows constantly towards us. And the present is this kind of slippery thing that you're not typically able to grasp onto, because before it actually becomes, the past, it becomes this very slippery place that's the present that's going, and then there's a future kind of approaching you immediately. So what Ellison is proposing is that there's a way in which certain subjects are able to extend that cognitive relationship with the notion of the present that gives you a moment to sit in what he considers to be the break. And some of this is Moten too, right? Fred Moten's In the Break. That becomes the break. And to me, that's a point of it's a point of rest. It's a point of consideration. It's a point of just manifold possibility, right? And both positive and negative, all kinds of things can happen. So what I'm trying to explore in this book is the question of how that space can become a positive space of subject regeneration.